We present a perceptually calibrated system for automatic aesthetic evaluation of photographic images. Given a single image, our method automatically generates a perceptually calibrated aesthetic signature as a compact objective representation of its aesthetic properties. The aesthetic signature comprises calibrated ratings of meaningful aesthetic attributes and provides an objective basis for aesthetic evaluation. By computing the static signatures of different images, we can both analyze them individually and compare them in terms of their aesthetic attributes. The aesthetic signature comprises 5 aesthetic attributes derived from some basic photographic rules. An important rule of photography is ensuring that the in-focus region is sharp. If none of the scene elements are in focus, this is often considered as a photographic error. On the other hand, increasing the depth of the photograph through the use of specific camera lenses is a technique often employed by professional photographers. The clarity rule favors photographs with clearly identifiable regions of interest and background, rather than visually cluttered photos where identifying a background and a center of interest is not even possible. The efficient use of the medium's dynamic range is another consideration when shooting photographs. As a general rule, if the difference in lightness between the brightest and the darkest region of an image is low, the image can be perceived as under or oversaturated and washed out. A sufficient level of global contrast often results in more plausible photographs. In addition to these attributes, the chromatic information of the image also plays an important role in image aesthetics. The colorfulness attribute can be used to differentiate photographs with lively and saturated colors from photographs with desaturated colors or grayscale photographs. For each of the 5 aesthetic attributes, our ground truth data is obtained by performing an experiment where we ask subject ratings for aesthetic attributes on a set of real-world images. The experimental setup consisted of 2 displays. One of the displays showed a photographic image from our test set, whereas the other display showed a short task description and 5 simple stimuli that provide the baseline for ranking. Our system utilizes a computational metric for each aesthetic attribute that are discussed in detail in the paper. The raw outcomes of these metrics are not very useful because the resulting attribute rating predictions are not normalized, and the rating predictions of different aesthetic attributes are not comparable with each other. Using the ground truth data we obtained experimentally, we calibrate our metrics by mapping their raw outcomes to perceptually normalized 5-point scale. The multidimensional aesthetic signature is useful on its own, but it can also be combined into a 1D overall aesthetics measure. Here we show an example macro photograph's aesthetic signature. Additionally, the subjective overall aesthetics rating obtained from the photo.net dataset are indicated with blue. The green bar shows the predicted overall aesthetics rating of Aydin, a state-of-the-art online aesthetics rating engine. The red bar shows the prediction of our method. Note that the aesthetic signature remains similar for this macro photograph, even though the contents of this and the previous photograph are different. However, for this image with a wide depth of field and consequently much less lens blur, but with strong global contrast, the shape of the aesthetic signature is different than the previous 2. Note that, in agreement with the subjective rating, the overall aesthetics rating computed by our method is still high, despite the different shape of the aesthetic signature. On the other hand, this image scores low on most of the aesthetic attributes, and consequently, our method predicts a much lower overall aesthetic score compared to the previous 3 images. As we demonstrate in these few examples, on average our method's overall aesthetics rating predictions are more consistent with the subjective ratings compared to Aydin. In fact, aesthetic judgment is a challenging task, and even the state-of-the-art fails to perform consistently on large datasets. Our method notably improves on Aydin and shows in this test set of nearly 1,000 images, where our method's correlation with the subjective data is 0.46 versus Aydin's correlation of 0.17. However, even with our method's better accuracy, the results of this study show that there is still a lot of room for improvement for the task of predicting an overall aesthetics rating. That said, the main strength of our method is the perceptually calibrated aesthetic signatures that enable multiple novel applications. In this example, the original image is dramatically improved in sharpness, depth, and to a lesser extent, colorfulness. This image has also been improved in sharpness and colorfulness at the cost of slight decrease in clarity. The edited image has high contrast details over the entire image, and as a result, no clearly identifiable subject region. Note that our method can be used even if there is no pixel correspondence between the original and the edited images. Our method can also complement current objective tone mapping evaluation methods from an aesthetics perspective. Instead of comparing the tone-mapped images with reference HDR images, our method directly evaluates tone-mapped images produced by the operators Drago, Tumblin, and Ward. We use images generated by the authors of the tone-mapping operators using their own set of parameters. A comparison of the aesthetic signatures showed that the results of Drago and Tumblin are quite similar, whereas Ward's operator results in higher sharpness and tone ratings. The same trend continues when we evaluate other images. For further analysis of the tone mapping operators, let us use Tumblin's operator as our baseline and normalize the Drago operator's aesthetic signature by the Tumblin operator's aesthetic signature. Repeating this over the 3 images we just showed, we get 3 relative aesthetic signatures, shown with different shades of brown. We can also compute the relative aesthetic signatures by repeating the same procedure for the Ward operator. Note that the relative aesthetic signatures are fairly consistent over multiple images. This suggests that our method captures some essential properties of these operators invariant over multiple images, and that their averages shown with the red dotted lines can be useful in comparing tone mapping operators. Global operations like brightness change can sometimes result in less appealing images. Multi-scale frameworks allow enhancing image details at different frequencies by local contrast editing, through which one can enhance tone and sharpness without significant negative consequences if not taken to extremes. This example shows the aesthetic consequences of suppressing and enhancing fine image details. Another example shows the aesthetic consequences of suppressing and enhancing coarse image details. Unnecessary editing can have negative aesthetic consequences. In this example, since this image has initially a high sharpness rating, further enhancing fine image details does not provide any improvement. The fine detail enhancement in this case significantly reduces the aesthetic appeal of the image by completely negating the depth of field effect reflected by the reduced depth and clarity ratings. As demonstrated in this last set of examples, our system can provide aesthetic feedback to the user during a multi-scale image editing session. This way, the user can be made aware of the aesthetic consequences of the changes he introduces to an image. In such a setting, our system can also prevent users from taking certain actions that will make the image worse. In summary, we presented the framework for automated image aesthetics. Given a single image, our system automatically computes an aesthetic signature that comprises calibrated ratings of a set of aesthetic attributes, and provides a compact representation of some of the input image's fundamental photographic properties.